Hello, thank you all for coming to our show and tell for this code sharing project. 6 weeks ago we started in this room and it's gone really fast, but it's been we've really enjoyed it, and hopefully we've got something useful to say today. Before we start, we're filming this session, so if you don't want to be included in our film, just drop me a message afterwards and we'll make sure you edit it out. Thank you all for coming. If you're in the room, shout out, wave, cheer, if you like. If you're dialing in, I think you've all done it already, but if you can mute your mics, that would be really helpful. If you're having a problem with bandwidth, maybe turning your video off might help. We're absolutely going to do questions. This whole thing, we've timed it, it's about 40 minutes. We're going to do questions at the end. If you feel like typing questions into Google as we go, that's absolutely fine. So without further ado, we will crack on. So this discovery project has got 4 councils in it, so Croydon, where I'm from, Brighton, Bracknell Forest and Oxford City Council. And we've also been blessed with 2 suppliers, DXW, where we're making this broadcast from, are helping us with product and research. An Agile Collective based in Oxford, they're helping us with Drupal expertise, licensing and governance. And we've just been blown away by the quality of the team that we've assembled for this. It's just been really sort of refreshing as an experience. I think we've reached peak beard almost, maybe I need to grow a beard. This is the team. It's not, so from here we've got Ertz doing product, there's me, yours truly, John Waterworth on research, Aaron on governance, Finn technical, Stephen is not with us today, I think he's on holiday on Drupal advice, and Andrew Katz is joining us from his office, I think, who helped on the legal side with IP and governance. And it actually came up in a retro, we're seriously not diverse, we're probably the least diverse team that's ever been created. So it's noticed, and we're absolutely going to do something about this. Our alpha proposal is much more, it's a richer group. So apologies up front for that. Before we get into the discovery proper, it's probably worth taking a couple of minutes to talk about the journey here. So for me personally, it's been about 2 years from thinking about it to actually doing this. Others less so, but a year, 18 months for a lot of people. And asking the question, why Brighton Hove and why Croydon? They're 2 sort of founder councils for this. And I think it comes down to the fact that I've been in my career blessed with some amazing colleagues that trust each other, that are there for each other, that are talented people. 2 years ago we started a transformation project in Brighton. We're very lucky to get that, to clear the ground of all the websites that we had. Brighton was on Drupal 7, we wanted to move to Drupal 8, and also rewrite a lot of the content that Brighton had as well. So that essentially gave us a clean sheet to think about this, over a period of time. That doesn't happen very often, so we were very lucky to get that. With the help of people on our team and a couple of agencies, Clearleft and Miggle, one on design and one on technical, we built this platform. So it's pretty much all the formats that you would expect in local government. So you can do news, regular standard pages, landing pages, guides, campaigns. It does all of those things. It's fully responsive and it's AA compliant. And we were lucky enough to get this project. We're thinking, well, we can't just get to the end and leave it. Can we actually share this? Is this something that other councils would benefit from? We talked a lot about that. We shared a few assets at the time. The design system that this is based on, we shared that. We blogged about it. And this blog post was actually on my website from a year ago, just over a year ago. We started to set out the idea of, what is this beyond the life of Croydon, beyond the life of Brighton, sorry. Is it a shareable thing? Is it a service? Is it a set of components that people can share? Happily, that blog post didn't go down in flames. I had a lot of really good responses from councils to that. Oxford City Council, so Neil Lawrence, who's part of this project, was sort of very open up front, saying, we really should do this. Bracknell Forest Council, Colin Stelling, saying, you know, these two councils became part of our discovery work. But plenty of other people were saying, well, this is a really good idea and long overdue. So it was good, you know, that that was responded to. In April 2019, I'd left Croydon, left Brighton by then. Croydon, Brighton, interchangeable in my head. I'd left Brighton and moved to Croydon. And Neil Williams, who was head of Gov UK, but he moved to Croydon and started as Chief Digital Officer there, said, oh, can I have a website? You know, okay, you know, let's not reinvent the wheel. That was my potentially sixth corporate website project. You know, what can we learn from the Brighton experience? What can we reuse? How do we just not reinvent the wheel again? Both Brighton and Croydon had signed the local digital declaration, so there was the start of a conversation around that. We decided to have a go and see if that would work. We spent a couple of sprints unpacking the Brighton code, assessing it. Does it work from a technical point of view? Does it fulfil the user needs? Can our content designers use it? And all those, you know, they're all yeses, fantastic. And then fast forward to December last year, we actually launched the site. So on the left is Brighton's site, it's been up for a while. On the right is Croydon's website, which was actually live in December, but the first real use of it is tomorrow, I think. So it's a bit of an exciting day for us today and tomorrow. It can be done. So, all good. Coming back to that question of why us, you know, why are we doing this? And I think it's a lot, you know, it's around being in the right place at the right time. So a few people pivotal to this project were able to meet and discuss, and that trust was there already. But I think it's a lot around people who are not in this room today having faith, and some of the folks on this photograph have been really important to this project, and I think it's worth mentioning those people. So over on the far right there is a lady called Ali, who was our boss in Brighton, who basically is a living legend. She's amazing, really wanted this to happen. The guy in the suit who's laughing is the chief executive in Brighton, Jeff Raw, very supportive. This lady here in the middle, Annie Heath, who's my boss now in Croydon. Again, all of these people get it, and that's really important. And you can say the same thing about Croydon as well. So Neil Williams, Dave, Annie, other people there, they all get it. And any of them could have said, do you know what, I don't think we're going to do this, and this project would have been over. So that backing and that support and trust is really important. I think there's one takeaway from all of this. We'll tell you all about all the findings in the next half an hour. But the really important thing is that people want to do work with each other. So, you know, bear that in mind as you watch the rest. So, enough rattling from me. I'm going to introduce you to Errol, who's our product lead.
Thanks, Will.
No worries.
Come over.
Yeah. Cool. Yes, as Will said, I'm from DXW, and I've been kind of leading the product stream in the discovery that we're about to present. So, just a note before I start talking about what we did. We want to kind of clarify the scope of the project before we start explaining more in detail about, you know, what the kind of focus of the discovery has been. And if you hear other people talking about, you know, what this project about, some people say, oh, it's code sharing. Some people say it's a Drupal code base. Some people say other things. So it's not a discovery in how code is shared, but it's more focused in how different people can come together and share an existing Drupal 8 code base. So that's just really important to bear in mind, because the previous one, the former one, which is code sharing discovery, is really massive. We're not doing that. So very quickly, early in the discovery, we decided to come away with a problem statement. We spent a day at our inception workshop trying to kind of crystallize this. And I tried different versions of this, but I think this one summarizes quite neatly, which is how can we help councils co-develop, share, and maintain open source Drupal code for their citizen-facing websites. Now, there's a few things that indicate the scope here as well. So, co-develop and share, that's about collaboration between councils, that's great. But there's also maintain there, which you will find out later in our findings section is a very important thing, because websites are a part of the council's core service delivery. So something needs to be maintained, even though you might be really good at the sharing level. You know, people would be really collaborative, but it still needs to be maintained all throughout its life cycle. So it's a product basically. And we also say citizen-facing websites. That's just for us to be able to focus on something tangible. And as Will said, you know, we're sometimes inventing the wheel from scratch when we're thinking about, oh yeah, we need a new website. So we just wanted to put our focus on that particular problem of external-facing websites. What we did is, there's a lot of activities that took place in the 6 weeks, and I can't believe all this happened in 6 weeks, but they did. So we did a lot of primary research with councils. That means face-to-face interviews, video interviews. John is going to talk about that a bit more in detail. Tons of desk research, especially in governance and licensing models. We had really nerdy discussions among us as well, which we're going to share with you. Technical audits, which are quite fun. Some of us do not understand them, but luckily we have some people in the room who can explain them to us in layman terms, which has been fantastic. And you know, collaboration is a big thing anyway, and there's lots of different models that you can apply, and we're going to talk about that as well. And assessing what's technically possible, and that has been part of the technical auditing. If we get to a space where we can share a code base, what are the technical things that need to happen to make that work? Committers, contributors, you'll hear about those as well. Just a nice map. Every discovery show and tell needs a map of you know, who did we talk. We talked to 10 councils. We were hoping for a better geographical spread maybe, but I think we still did all right. So one council up in north, some councils in central England, some in the west. But yeah, face-to-face and video interviews, that's really important that we sit with the people and ask them open-ended questions and just query the line of thought and where they're coming from. They included unitary authorities, city, county and district councils, so a good variety of types of councils that we spoke to. So what were the focus of these questions? I mean, John is going to tell you a lot more, but in a nutshell, we wanted to hear about how do they currently manage their websites, what do their websites do, what's their maintenance models, or have they heard anything about this project currently, what might excite them, what might actually really put them off, and also if they were to join any collaboration project in a tech space, how would they envisage this to work so that we can get those things and then start thinking about them before we get to the end of discovery. So that's me. I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to talk you through the findings of the research.
Okay, so thank you, Ert. Yes, we've got more, there'll be a more detailed report with some more detailed findings, but we're going to take you through some of the ones that we think were most important and some summaries of what we think that meant. So the first one, I guess this feels fairly obvious to a lot of people who'll be working in local government, but I think it really kind of sets the scene, is so the councillors we're speaking to, it's really hard for them, as Will alluded to get into a kind of continual maintenance and improvement of their site. They're under significant pressure to improve the service they provide through the websites, but they have really constrained resources to be able to do that. And so all the people we're speaking to are kind of desperate to get out of this wasteful cycle of regularly and repeatedly kind of reinventing the wheel, making a new website, and often, which we'll slightly allude to, because of other problems with kind of content strategy and content management and ownership and how they're doing things, they're often going through that cycle of making a new website which doesn't turn out to be fantastically better than what they had before, and they're kind of just setting themselves up a few years down the road to have to do that again. We see when we speak to councils is this idea of common problems that means that it makes sharing really attractive. A lot of people will say, we're all doing blue badges, we're all doing bins, we're all doing things with kind of roads and transport. Surely we can share some of this. But on top of that, as well as sharing kind of technical assets, actually what we're talking about is having a code base. What people talk about is the kind of slight loneliness of doing this. They're often in quite a small team that's under pressure in a particular local authority, and really feeling like that as well as getting a code base, we can be part of a more supportive community where we're sharing ideas, we're thinking about the way we're going with that, we're sharing ways of working. Some of these other things that aren't to do with the code, we can help each other and support each other as well. So there's a community around the code that's really important. And open source generally, and Drupal in particular, can work for councils. There are a significant number of councils who are using open source technologies and using Drupal in particular, and Drupal is seen as an exemplar of that kind of open source technology in the community around it. And it supports a lot of the kind of approaches that councils are taking. So having something where staff who aren't developers can be doing a lot of work, creating content and managing and configuring the site, using kind of low-code platforms where there is some technical effort that is creating that, but then there are other staff in the council who can build on that, who don't need to be, everything you do doesn't have to involve developers. There is some distrust around open source. There'll be people who are very used to commissioning, their main way of working is to commission and manage proprietary solutions. But the one thing that we saw is that a code base that's created and used not by another commercial organisation, but by other councils, creates a lot of that kind of social proof and trust that this is actually a good way to go, because we can see it's working for other people. One of the things we were really interested in, and I think we had this kind of phrase of it being a code club, was this going to be something that only worked for a small number of councils that have quite large and sophisticated in-house development teams, or could it work for other people? And what we found is code sharing can work for councils who will be coming from different starting points and have different levels of capability. So code sharing can work for councils who have significant problems with their current website, are going to take the complete new code base as a starting point, but also can work for councils who are actually reasonably happy with what they've got, but would really be interested, because of their limited ability to develop, would be really interested in particular components that they can take from the code base. And code sharing can work for councils who buy in Drupal development capability when they need it, as well as for councils who have their own capability. And we thought there might be some really significant difference there, and actually we've not seen a significant difference in how that might work for people. And what we've seen is that councils do expect, lots of them specifically said, some piece of paper that's going to frame how that collaboration will work, but not some kind of weighty agreement that's going to drag them into where there's fees involved, which immediately starts getting into procurement, which immediately starts getting into longer legal discussions. So something that's really simple that helps people to join in. But as it says here, that is simple and transparent and open to councils joining and leaving. People talk about not feeling, not wanting to be kind of handcuffed to something once you start. For those of you who've seen this, we also we thought about this in terms of switching forces. For those of you who've seen these kind of models, this is an adoption model. So you're thinking about if someone's doing something one way and they want to change, what are the things that are going to move them, that are going to push them away from the way they're doing and attract them to the new thing? And what are the things that will create some inertia that will stop them moving away, or that will make them anxious about the new thing? And to summarise what we found, the kind of push for councils is that problem of not meeting the needs of the public, and particular technical challenges. Very often they'll have had some people are now on obsolete web technology platforms that are out of support and cost them huge amounts of money when they do need to do something. They've got tight resource constraints, so the thought of, okay, so how do we get out of that? Well, actually building a whole new thing for ourselves just feels like something that's going to be too much. And then the pull to working on a collaborative and shared code base, this continual feeling people talk about of stopping reinventing the wheel. Do we have to make another new one? Exactly as Will said. Surely there's other people who are doing this. Being able to multiply your development effort. So you work with some people to make some new component, maybe that is, we've been talking about mapping and different kinds of lists and event records. Well, actually, you put some development in, but other people are putting development effort in as well, and you're receiving that, so that multiplies your development effort as well. And then the other one was being part of that community, that feeling like, if this is how we want to go, I'm not going that way on my own. Particularly that was for some of the people where they might be going for a complete replacement going to Drupal, well actually I can do that as being part of this community. There are some things that will hold people back. So that feeling of limited capability, that this isn't something we've done before, so how this as a community can help people make that transition. Often kind of divided ownership and decision making. We hear a lot of people where the website is split between quite different bits of the council, so who would actually decide this and who are they going to have to influence. And then obviously the tight resource constraints are both a push for you to want to do this, but equally they're a constraint. So where would we get the time and effort and kind of money? There will, change costs money, even from worse to better. That even to get to the better thing, it's going to take some little cost. There are anxieties for the people who feel like they're going to want to contribute. There feels like there could be a burden both in supporting other people, but maybe you have to do extra work than you maybe wouldn't need yourself. From other people, it's support. So if I'm going to adopt this, what support and documentation I get? And as I say, within some organisations, there is some distrust of open source. So you'll have some parts of a local authority where they're really interested in this. You'll have other parts where this is something they're just, they're not used to and they may not have chosen before. And the last bit of this in a model, what that gave us was some thoughts about different adoption paths for different councils in different circumstances. So we love a 2x2. So basically, we're thinking about councils who are using Drupal, councils who are not using Drupal. Problem and okay are very, very broad terms, but broadly we did start to see people who've got a really significant problems with their current website, either just more technical problems, more in terms of how it works with the public, and people who feel like no one, I don't think any local council would hold up and say our site is perfect, but some of them broadly, we've got a site that we feel like it works, we've got good content rules, things are kind of okay. And so what we see is existing sites, existing councils who've got Drupal but have significant problems and challenges. Maybe there's a big, for those of you who don't know, there's a big upgrade moment in Drupal to get from 7 to 8. Maybe if they've got some other problems, that's enough to say, well actually, rather than trying to kind of bend to what we've got now, we could take the complete code base. But we're already doing Drupal, so that feels like that's not such a difficult thing. There are other people that think, well actually our code base is, our site's working fine, but we really like those two things that Brighton and Croydon are doing, and as there's more people working on it, there'll be more things that they'll really want. So can they take those components and reuse those and contribute in that way? The third group we see are people who aren't currently using Drupal, but they've got something they know they're going to have to start again. They're on an obsolete platform, the thing really isn't working, they're going to have to start again. They're probably going to go to a new content management system anyway. Actually, the combination with a shared code base that you have some proof is already working for councils, that gives you, and if you're considering Drupal anyway, that gives an extra reason why you may then consider Drupal and take the extra code base, because those two things go together. There's obviously a fourth, which is the largest group, so their website isn't having terrible problems, they're not using Drupal. For the moment, that's not an initial target, that's not a set of people we've considered. We've spoken to people in all of these other groups, but potentially, there is no reason why a council in that group might not join, but we've not particularly made that a priority in terms of thinking about that. So that's given us a set of findings that have given us a really good idea of what the shape and the boundaries of our discovery is, and to be able to think about what things we might be doing in alpha. So the next piece of the puzzle was to look at what is technically possible, the work around the code base that Brighton and Croydon are currently sharing. At which point I hand over to Finn.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Finn from Agile Collective. We're a digital company based in Oxford and remotely in Northern Italy and other places. I've been the technical lead on this project along with Stephen, who's not currently with us today. He's on holiday. He was also the Drupal and technical lead. We focused on 3 important questions in our technical research on this project, which are, is the current code shareable? Is it in a shareable state? Looking at the code that both Brighton and Hove and Croydon have been sharing already. What might the proposed new architecture look like in terms of making it more shareable, and how might organisations actually contribute and commit and start sharing in a sort of meaningful and productive way. How we did that was auditing the code and content, talking to the current developers in Croydon and Brighton and Hove, and finally making some recommendations. So I'll just talk through those, hopefully not too quickly. Sorry, I'm just going to readjust my slide so I can see the slide. So yeah, first thing we noticed looking at the code, which actually there's quite a lot of code from Brighton and Hove and from Croydon, a lot of which is shared. The first thing we noticed is it is generally well written, but it's not really architected initially for sharing. That's not to say that it can't be shared, as it has been shared at the moment, but there are a number of aspects about it which really you know, sort of could be improved if we're looking at sharing it with other councils. One of these is the dependencies. We've talked about, the architecture of both content entities and of the custom code is quite interdependent. A sort of brief, sketchy diagram, which you may or may not be able to see in any detail remotely, just illustrates the interdependencies of content types and the content structure of the site. If we're looking at sharing something with multiple councils and multiple developers, this really needs to be detangled, is that a word?
Untangled.
Untangled, thank you so much. In order to try and make it more shareable and more component-based. So, leading on to what the proposed architecture might look like, in Drupal there is a concept of a Drupal distribution, which is a package of Drupal code with default installation configuration. And so we think that, well, it seems quite obvious to us that local gov Drupal, as we're kind of dubbing it, should be formatted as a distribution so that new councils, new developers coming on board can take it, run an installation profile, and have a Drupal core, probably Drupal 8 initially, Drupal 9 by the end of the year, along with a local gov core with default content types and theme, and then a modular architecture sitting on top. So again, another diagram which is not meant to be seen in great detail, but you can link off to it potentially from the slides. Drupal core underneath, a local gov installation profile with lots of default configuration dubbed fit for purpose for most councils, things like service content types and standard page content types, and structural components like paragraphs for content. And then a bunch of local gov optional modules on top, things like directories, step-by-step pages, and guide pages, which some councils may want and others may not. So just really trying to make it a lot more modular and tease apart those dependencies. So second proposal is to make the changes to the content architecture in that way, remove the unnecessary dependencies, include common content types, and really ensure that any optional content types and features are fully modular. Back to this idea that the local gov optional modules may well want to be used by some of the people who are already using Drupal, as John said, and try to remove the dependencies between the core install profile and the optional modules, such that something like directories could be taken and reused on a site, which is not necessarily using the default distribution. So that's changes to the content architecture. The other proposal and recommendation is to make changes to the custom code underlying. As I've said, it's generally well written, but not really architected to be to remove those dependencies. So rationalising those dependencies is some work that should be done ahead of sharing it more widely. Possibly looking at naming conventions. Obviously, a lot of the code has been written with Brighton and Hove naming conventions, and then subsequently Croydon naming conventions. If we're looking to share it more widely, it probably makes sense to consolidate on a more local gov Drupal type generic naming convention, which may add some complexity for adoption for Brighton and Hove and Croydon. Something we hope to look at in a potential alpha phase. Removing any other unnecessary complexity in the code seems like an obvious thing, but it's important to state it, to try and make it as straightforward as possible, and adhering to Drupal best practices and coding standards, something I'll come to again in a minute. So the third question, how might we organisations contribute and actually work on the same code base? We spent a bit of time looking at guidelines and producing a set of guidelines, which again are linked to from here. Essentially how to contribute, how to work together in a meaningful way, and to allay some of the fears of councils on a shared code base. So there's a document which is Links to from here, which you can look at in more detail if you want to, but essentially how to review, looking at peer review, looking at adopting coding standards, documentation, and all importantly, automated testing. Something which there is a certain amount of testing already in the code. But leading on from that, something that has been raised a number of times is how to do automated testing. I suppose we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but assuming it's a fully open source project, there are services like GitLab who provide automated testing for free for open source projects. So making use of best in class automated testing on infrastructure that essentially we don't have to pay for, which again we'll see in a bit is something that is probably quite important. So that looks like half a slide. This was a summary slide, supposed to say that building to summarize that we're going to build on the we propose that it build on the great work to date, re-architecture the code and structure, and automate all the things hopefully for free. Services that are open and freely available, such as GitLab, and I can't remember what the other thing was. Oh yeah, adopting consistent guidelines. And so I'm going to hand over to Aaron now. He's going to talk a little bit about our governance and licensing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Finn. Yes, I was leading on the governance and licensing work. Andrew, who you can see on the call here, as a leading open source lawyer, so he was very much the kind of key part of the second half of that work, but also had a load of experience and knowledge about existing projects, which was a key approach that we took, essentially not reinventing the wheel. It's been mentioned a lot. There's a lot of knowledge already out there. So our job was to consolidate that knowledge and then look at the right approach for us. So we were looking at 3 questions. So looking at the most suitable model for where we are now, also looking ahead a little bit, but the approach we took was just looking at the different, so licensing, development model, the governance, so how we would organise and structure, how formal that would be, and the any potential financial model, which actually during the process we sort of discounted at this stage, and we'll come on to that. And then the second step was then to look in a bit more detail about how organisations would work together, how they would join the project, leave the project, how they would work together and contribute during the life cycle of their time with the project. And then a kind of, again, maybe the next stage of that was then looking at the decision-making and collaborative process in a bit more detail. So in terms of the first question, Andrew and then I did a load of research that's based on different projects that are out there, the open source projects, some that are also public sector related, and did a few workshops on the sort of licensing and those different models. And through that process, we ended up at a pretty clear sense of where we were and what the logical next step was. So moving from something that was fairly ad hoc and a sort of handshake agreement to a more formal agreement, which didn't necessitate any creation of any sort of a body or formal foundation. So again, very much the mantra of good enough for now. We're not going to solve all the problems for all time. We're looking at the current situation, and we have a sort of roadmap and a direction that could go if the project is a success. So we found, as sort of mentioned, at this stage we're going to keep it pretty light. We can move to a more formal foundation. Nothing precludes that at this stage. But moving to that was just going to get in the way of actually collaborating and sharing code. So at this stage what we needed was a memorandum of understanding. John has touched on this again. We needed this to be pretty lightweight, easy to understand, and a set of agreements that that put in place the kind of working arrangement, and then any further detail will be linked to from there. So on the technical side that Finn's talked about, and then on the product management side in terms of the roadmap and releases, but then also the overall governance and how we make decisions together. as I mentioned, we did a fair amount of work on the licensing models, which was really helpful, but also, you know, comes with a fair amount of complexity. It's not easy to understand this stuff. Andrew was fantastic at kind of laying out the whole approach. I think that's what Ed was talking about in terms of the geeky discussion, which was great. We then sort of backed up a little bit and agreed that the best way to tackle that aspect, because people get kind of attached to it, was to really settle on and be clear about what our purpose was, why we're doing this, and what the values that underpin that. And through that, actually, it became very clear and logical that, you know, working in the open and publishing under open source licenses just made sense. And one of the reasons it made sense is that, you know, Drupal's license is GPL version 2, and following that, for most cases, was completely the right approach. So the MOU, I'll touch on in a little bit more detail, but I'm not going to cover everything. There's more. It's linked off to from the discovery report here as well. But just going into this aspect of how we're working together. So we drafted something in sprint 2, and then in sprint 3 we passed that around for testing, got a load of feedback. A lot of that stuff is tightening up some language. There are some concerns in there that we can work on and work through in alpha. And it's very much a straw man approach. We've got to test it out. And we won't know until we test it exactly what's working and what needs tweaking. So there's nothing sort of completely set in stone. So we were covering the purpose, I mentioned, values, licensing, liability, which came up, governance, so that's in that kind of the structure, I guess, how you join, how you leave, and what commitment you might be expected to provide, whether time or financial. But this is the purpose. You might recognise this from the problem statement, but it was nice that this sort of came back and became very clear. So the purpose: to establish and grow an active group of councils, to co-develop, share and maintain open source Drupal code for our citizen-facing websites. And through this aim to be open and collaborative and sharing. The values that this is based on, again, you know, there's work that had already been done, and this again felt a very natural fit, that we would be surfacing the key values that are in the local digital declaration, an open culture, working in the open, sharing our code, sharing our experiences, collaboration with ourselves and also other organisations outside this project, and reusing what we have, plus the commitment to publishing our work under open source licenses and making, you know, getting all the benefit from that as well. I've touched on the licensing, but yeah, you know, this code should be published under the open source GPL. Andrew's available, we can talk about that a little bit more if you really want to get geeky. But, you know, fundamentally that's part of the values and the purpose of this project, so it felt like a natural fit. Because there is no formal foundation, liability is not an aspect here. This is, you know, you go into it and you provide what you provide, you work in the best way possible, and there's no liability attached to that work and that contribution. If we move to a more formal structure, that's one of the benefits that a foundation can provide. It can provide that kind of safety net if needed. Again, starting light, we'll just have two groups, the product group, the technical group. The product group is, the larger group will contain people from the technical group and will be responsible for the overall governance, so things like the MOU, any membership criteria, that kind of thing. But then also the setting of the product roadmap, delivery, planning, releases. The technical group, much more focused on contribution and how we're committing and sharing code together, the standards by which we're doing that, making sure things are secure and safe, and also enabling new people to join and contribute, so that the committer is moving from contribution to a core committer and growing the community. Joining and leaving, pretty simple really. I mean, the only thing to mention specifically is that at this stage, the members of this group or this project will be people from local councils, so we're not seeing commercial partners at this stage. and that there is the option to walk away and you take the code with you. It's an open source license, and you'll still retain access to that. In terms of commitment, we talked a lot about the code side. The contribution that people can give to this is pretty varied. Obviously, developing code is going to be key, but user research skills, product management skills, architecting and coming up with approaches, testing those approaches, testing the code that's been developed, and then also the sort of wider aspect of helping the project run effectively, onboarding new people, promoting the project, writing blog posts, tweeting, etc. All of this stuff is going to be a key part to sort of grow the contribution. And just to sort of reiterate on the financial point of view, no foundation. Once we get into the money exchanging hands, it becomes complicated. It's very clear that this is a time commitment at this stage. So there's no plan to accept financial donations or for any money to change hands between local councils. Keep it simple. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, but we got good feedback from the MOU, but even, I didn't think I was expecting to see someone actually saying that they enjoyed reading it. That was nice. But also that it was covering kind of what we needed to cover. It was pretty light, so that was good. It felt like it was good feedback. There's things we can certainly improve. And also, I like that it's concise, which is good. No one's ever said that about my writing. Finally, the decision-making process. Again, we did a load of research looking at open source projects and just did some modelling about how, looking at those different approaches. There's quite a lot, but they're generally based on consensus decision-making. So we came up with a sort of combined approach that covered the sort of degree of impact that a decision might have, and the scope in which that impact the decision affects. So on the sort of formal side, where there are big decisions that have the potential to sort of fundamentally alter the nature of the project, we need to be fairly formal, we need to be careful, considered about this, and have a fairly structured process. And maybe an example of that would be, changing the membership criteria for the project and allowing different organisations or people to join. So this is using a consensus-seeking approach that builds on what the Apache Foundation used, which was consensus, to the Node.js Foundation, so a newer open source project. But very simply and broadly, you make a proposal, people vote on it, 3 options, yes, no, or abstain. If you vote no, this must include clear reasons for the no and an alternative proposal. So you're always looking to be constructive and not just blocking. And then having the sort of safety net of a majority vote being able to be called if no resolution can be found. So that idea of continually trying to move forward and not put blockers in the way to progress. On the other end of the scale, for sort of smaller decisions that will add value but maybe the risk is not so big, the lazy consensus approach, which is a very commonly used approach, Apache certainly use it widely and others as well. The idea here is essentially it's silence means assent. So if you don't say anything, that's fine, you can get on with it. So you very simply announce what you're going to do, allow time for any objections or considerations that need to be raised. If none, crack on and report back. I mean, part of this is also being open and transparent with what you're doing, but not at the expense of empowering people to do work. We want to enable people to do work. People are busy. They're giving their own time. This is a sort of commitment. I'm going to hand over to Will, who's going to just talk through the benefits case and then wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. How are we all doing so far? Good? About another 5 minutes left. You can stay with us. So, one of the things that we needed to give back to CLG is some idea of the money, time spent, you know, what do we gain from this? So we think there's 4 ways, some are easier to count than others, that this project benefits. So we've seen already, you can definitely launch new sites more quickly. You can use this platform to launch microsites. I'll explain what they are in a minute. You absolutely can reduce customer contact, although it's very hard to quantify. We'll talk about that. And the fact that we're in this sort of this sharing, collaborative culture, we all learn from each other. We've absolutely seen that. So let's take these in turn. I'm not going to go into all these numbers, but there's a couple of things that are worth pointing out. So the one good piece of hard evidence we've got is when Croydon took Brighton's code, we did the work that they did in a third of the time. So actually you can start to use that to understand how other people might handle it. We think there's 3 types of councils in this, the building of what John said earlier. You've got switchers, they're either on Drupal or coming to Drupal. You've got people who build Drupal as a project, like as a one-off payment with an agency largely, or people that do Drupal work and they run an in-house team. So, crunch the numbers, you know, assuming costs reduced by 2/3, you're looking at 55 councils in England using Drupal, let's say 45 use agencies and the rest have got in-house teams. The agency lot are saving about £3 million, and the in-house teams are saving about £1 million. Now, over what time scale? This is hard as well, but let's say that you replace your website every 3 to 4 years. It's that kind of time scale that we're talking about these savings. It's very hard to take, some things are project funded, some things are team funded, so it's quite hard to get your head around. But we think that's conservative. So, how about that? What about the microsites? And when we say microsites, we're not talking about modern gov, consultation websites, planning portals. We're talking about flat publishing websites, of which Croydon has got many, Brighton has got many. It's the long tail of stuff that you'd sooner have it on the corporate platform, but it's not quite you're not quite able to do that. So across the partners in Discovery and some of the councils that we spoke to, we reckon there's at least 5 microsites of this type in every council, and the costs for rebuilding something like these, a finger in the air, it's 10 days of design and dev time, there's an accessibility component, there's definitely a pen testing component. It's about 13 grand a site. We've seen more, we've seen less, absolutely. If we look at the 8 councils we're proposing for Alpha, that's about £500,000. The 55 councils using Drupal is 3.5 million. And I think that's conservative, because there's much more out there that we don't know about. The rest of this is a bit of a cop-out, I must admit. We know that our websites have reduced customer contact. Specifically, how much, we don't know. And a lot of this is down to data collection in councils. So where is it, what is it? Is it granular enough? Is it collected well enough? And are the cultures in councils set up to actually review and iterate based on the data that you find and track back to that to see what you've done? Well, everywhere I've worked, I've never been able to do that. There's just not enough time to do it. So I think this is something we need to look at a bit more. In addition, councils joining this project, I think, realise that having a good publishing platform is really only the start of this. So great tech, brilliant. But if you can't write content, if you haven't got content design as a culture, and if your culture isn't set up to reflect on data and user research, then you're wasting your time probably. Technology is one thing, but content, user research and data is a completely different thing. And we think in the councils that are joining, they're starting to go on this journey. It's another bonus for joining it. So we'll report that back if we get to Alpha. Happily, we've absolutely shared knowledge with each other. And in the user research calls that I was a part of, councils were as interested in sharing knowledge, know-how. How do you do this? How do you talk to a stakeholder? How do you do a content audit? As they were in the technology itself. So that's a big bonus. It's not just about the code, the lines of code that you get and the theme. It's actually about how you do this, how you do publishing as a profession. So we might well start to see a bit of a local publishing profession appear out of this. We'll see. nearly there. Before we get to next steps, it's worth pointing out that you need a mission patch for these kind of things. It is a given. And a good place to start is something that's really memorable. So you remember Finn, this guy, wore this hat, oh my God, in one of the early meetings we had. Well, that's crying out for a mission patch, so there you go. So nice hat, Drupal 8 logo, and this Drupal 8 droplet, which I'm sure you've seen around. So this is our patch for discovery. Probably we'll do another one for alpha. Hope you like that. Next steps. This is the last section, I promise. We think there's an alpha here. We've submitted a proposal to CLG, we're waiting to get back. And it includes the following things. Fix the code and theme, so it's flexible enough for anyone to pick up what they want. And then when we've done that, test various concepts at scale. So, is this code flexible enough? Do people like the MOU, or is it too much? Do they like the licensing stipulations we put on it? What about your agencies? Do they like them? Because a lot of people don't. How do we do collaboration? We have lots of thoughts about doing this. We're anxious to run a collaboration session and try out some of the ideas that we found. We also need a shop window for this, because people keep asking what it does. We're not very good at explaining that right now. We need to be better at that. So those things, these councils, so slightly more than we had before. Delighted to be joined by Cumbria, who might be on the call, Westminster, London councils and Kensington, Chelsea. They all want to move to Drupal. I think some of them are on Drupal already. They want to get involved, and we're delighted that they're on board. And we need suppliers to help us with some of this. So there'll be a round of procurement, I imagine, afterwards. Split like this. So 4 weeks of refactoring, really trying to work out what it is that we're trying to do. And that will be our suppliers and potentially developers from the councils that are coming in. So a kind of all hands on deck approach. Doing what Finn and Aaron explained earlier. So this big piece here is Croydon or Brighton, and it needs to be a componentised thing, so you can take the bits that you want. And already some councils have said, do you know what, I really want that bit. And we're going, oh, okay, how do we do that? After we've done the refactoring, we're proposing 8 weeks where we try these things out. So councils try and install this, try and use it, read the MOU, show it to your colleagues, show it to legal if you have to. We'll see how that goes. Getting everyone in a room for a collaboration, 4 or 5 product managers working together should be fun. In terms of the councils that are joining us, they need different things, it's a nice group of councils, different tiers, different needs. So Croydon and Brighton are already on the platform. If we're doing refactoring, we've got to do it in a way that doesn't hurt us, that we benefit from. These councils coming in, they want everything, that's brilliant. We can definitely help them with that. Bracknell is a discovery partner from the start, wanted some things, not all things, and we need to take that into account. So that's the alpha if we're able to go ahead. We're almost done, last but one slide. Separately, even if you're not on Drupal, there's a lot here that we would recommend you look at. So how you do collaboration, who's involved, how you make decisions, how you write an MOU that makes sense that people are not scared off by. I think this relates to other technologies. It doesn't have to be a Drupal project. So we're going to parcel all this up, and you can enjoy it and hopefully come back to us. That's what you think. That's us. Thank you so much for watching. You can get in touch with us on the local digital Slack. There's a channel called Local Gov Drupal. You can contact me via Twitter. I'm WillGov. You can go on the Croydon website, croydon.digital, read about us there. Or you can go and talk to our suppliers who've been amazing, Agile Collective and DXW. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you all so much.
Not other than, have you got the slides? So I sent a link to the slides
Okay.
to the chat.
Has anyone got any questions? If maybe type something and we'll... Have we done this before? Oh, question from the room.
Yeah, so do you know the difference between the Drupal cost compared to a non-open source provider?
Oh, could be.
Could you ballpark that?
So I remember a cycle project that I was on that was hundreds of thousands. That would be the top end probably. Jadu is one of the examples that we looked at, which Oxford uses. I think it was 60 to get on board, which involved licensing, licensing, onboarding, customisation, but quite limited, and it was about 16 grand a year for hosting and support. So that's probably the lower end, but it's it's between those two. Or Squarespace, which we know one council does, credit card, which it's a very nice website as well.
And also just as I think something that you mentioned about the reduced customer contact, you obviously highlighted this in the panel, which I thought was a really good point, but like, that's obviously really hard to measure. But this would, I assume that by having something that's open source and something that's easy to change in-house, that would actually make it easier and actually cheaper as well, because I assume that like the costs of actually having change in Jadu is actually quite extortionate compared to doing something like this.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I think any proprietary system, there's going to be, there'll be a change request, there'll be stuff that wraps around that, and then the cost of whatever it is. I mean, I don't know about Jadu, I've never worked with it, but other places I've worked, it's like, you won't get any work for less than 10 grand. It seems to be a flat rate wherever you go. Oh, that'll cost you 10, that'll be 20. Multiples of 10 grand.
I think it would be interesting going forward, assuming this project continues, just to do a bit of market analysis to understand like how this product compares with whatever else is on the market in terms of like the cost, in terms of functionality, in terms of like ease of adoption or whatever, those kinds of things. So I think because it's a discovery, so we're looking at the business case and we're like, oh, okay, well you have some preliminary numbers, that's great, thank you so much. But as you progress, we need more and more from you. Yeah. So I think the questions that Mark is asking, they're quite important ones. And we would, I mean, obviously it's like a high level plan for alpha, but if you want to progress, ideally you would do a little bit of that engagement to understand like who's the next largest supplier and like how can you position yourselves against them.
Yeah, and I think if I can just add that, one of the really interesting thing talking to the councils is, a few of them talked about they're already at a kind of a minimum in terms of the amount of resource they've got. So getting out of this cycle of having to make a case and get approval to build a new site is then limits them to what they can ever actually do to try and improve, because that's effectively what they're often spending all their money on. So it's more taking that money and being able to actually do better things, which at the moment they find very, very difficult, because either they're stuck with a terrible structure and a terrible infrastructure that means it's really hard for them to make improvements, or if they do then build a new site, a new structure that's better, they tend to get you've just asked us for a load of money to build a new site, and then it takes a lot of effort for them to get some more results. So that's what I mean about trying to get out of that cycle of where the money's going on these things.
And I think completely agree, and it's also like having that money to be able to migrate, like even content migration, whatever, it's like all of those kinds of things. And it's great to see that you've already got like 8 partners, if I'm not misquoting, just lined up, so people it demonstrates that there's definitely appetite to get this going. I have a question. How did you find those 10 councils that you did research with? Did you just
largely people who came to us.
Yeah.
So we figured, we've got 6 weeks.
Right.
We can't go to everybody that we really want to. We've got to go to the people who've expressed an interest. And they were different. The nice, happy thing about it is they were all different.
Yeah.
I was quite lucky when it came down to it. Big city councils, Westminster's, Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea. County councils like Cumbria. A really nice mix. People who weren't quite councils like London councils. Yeah. And it's nice that we've had that sort of diverse group. I think as we go out further, one of the things we probably would have done had this been a sprint or 2 more is try and get out further to the edges. Yeah. So the people who really said no, well, why? Exactly. But also the folks that you said, trying to find out what the market analysis is. One of the reasons we didn't do that is nobody said they wanted to buy it. No one. when they realised what it was they wanted to join.
Yeah.
So had we had somebody coming along and said, oh, but I'll give you £5,000 a year,
Yeah.
I think that would have led us in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
Our hunch is that we'll find loads more as we get further out.
Mm.
But in this 10, when people realise what it was, it's actually, no, we'll get some developers who will join.
Yeah.
We'll get them like hook or by crook in a lot of places,
Yeah.
but we'll get them.
So the people that you spoke to, like the councils, have you got like a mix of ones that are already looking at Drupal, the ones that are not, or there may have been a slide of.
I'll go back to it. So,
It wasn't that, I remember.
so I mean, it's more than this group anyway,
Yeah,
but for
yeah.
let's say for this group, we're both on Drupal.
Yeah.
Brighton always has been,
Mm.
historically,
No,
years.
since about 2012, I think.
Yeah, so to,
Still a long time.
That's always.
Yeah.
That is always.
No, yeah, I was going to say, you know that exactly. Yeah.
Croydon was definitely on Drupal 7, but Tom, who's on the call, probably could tell you more about how that's worked, although it moved from being a service provided by a third party to an in-house operation, so I'm part of the project that's doing that. Cumbria is on a 15-year-old CMS, I can't remember what it is, but they want to get rid. London Council, I think, on Drupal 7. Oxford are on Jardu. Kensington, Chelsea, I think, on Drupal 7. Westminster's on Drupal 7. It's interesting, I don't know if Westminster's on the call, but we had a chat with them about a year ago. They came on and said Drupal's one of our options. We don't know whether we're going to do it. They were interested in the club and collaboration, and it was one of the things that tipped them into the Drupal camp because this thing existed. I mean, John talked about that.
Yeah, and some of them are quite mixed. So part of, in that corner of some of the people who want to take the whole code base is because they're using bits of Drupal and they're using bits of this and they've got bits of that, and it's starting to really hurt them that they've got lots of different content management.
Right.
But the thing they have got on Drupal doesn't feel like it's a good enough thing to be the thing that they're going to build on. So the code base feels like an opportunity that they can expand that Drupal use, as Will was saying, the kind of microsites, all the stuff that's done differently. So it's a bit of a consolidation, but that would have felt like too much to build from scratch, and this feels like the opportunity for them to do that.
Bracknell's interesting in that I mean, not that other councils don't do Drupal well, they're very focused on a particular way of doing Drupal.
Okay.
They're very good at accessibility, for example, and they've invested a lot of time in that, so they want to preserve a lot of that, which sends them more down the component route.
Right.
And I reckon we'll meet more councils like this. We'll meet some like this, but I reckon we'll meet loads like this, where they've already done something and they don't want to throw that away, either on Drupal 7 or Drupal 8. So we have to have components that are good enough to plug into what they already have. I think that's probably the biggest challenge of all. We'll bite that off, see where we get to. Have we got any questions from the
We've got one
chat?
question online from Hannah, web manager at Milton Keynes, who says, can I have some reassurance about security using open source and shared code, and also ongoing costs for patching and upgrades? So the first part of that question is reassurance about security and using open source. I mean, for anybody who doesn't use Drupal or hasn't used a healthy open source project, it's worth underlining that security is paramount for open source projects, and has been proven time and time again that open source communities, healthy open source communities, respond quicker, more swiftly, and more better, essentially, than the proprietary solutions. Various issues over the last few years have, kind of essentially put that question to bed, that just because it's open source means it's less secure because everyone can see the source code, it's the opposite way around. Everyone can see the source code, so everyone can see that it is secure. And if anyone finds a problem, they can report it through certain channels, and security teams can fix it and release patches in a coordinated manner, so that everybody who's using the open source has the use of that security update. Essentially, the more eyes are on the code, the more likely anyone's going to spot an issue and fix it. So I think that argument, if you're not familiar with that, Hannah, then Drupal has an amazing security team, and anyone who's already using Drupal is relying on Drupal community and the security team to operate in that way, and the great security of Drupal. Add a layer of shared code on top of that, then that's where all of the sort of standards and following Drupal best practices and looking at other open source communities and how they do manage that process. If you delve a bit deeper into our documents, there is a discussion that mentions security issues being the only thing that isn't publicly shared. If someone finds something, that will go through a private channel. It's notified to core committers of whatever the project is, and then they can look at the security issue, assess it, address it, fix it, and release patches in a coordinated manner. Anyone who hosts the Drupal site already knows that Drupal security updates come out on a scheduled basis every other Wednesday, I believe. First and third Wednesdays of the month, perhaps, for core and contrib. And I suggest, a project like this would follow a similar pattern. It's worth mentioning that we haven't really touched on hosting, but different people have different hosting solutions. So any council hosting their website would need to arrange their own method of hosting and security updates and the deployment processes. But I think another thing that we can do with this project is actually share best practices in security updates, in automating some of that. I mean, we as a Drupal company automate a bunch of security updates for a lot of our clients, and so there's other services around there which can really help with that.
I think it's worth saying that in the alpha phase, in the proposed alpha phase, we'll see what happens with that. We are a coding club. We are, and that in order to join, you need to bring some dev expertise from your centre for this reason. So we'll be maintaining. Stop me if I'm wrong, but I think it's important to say that if as a group, we need to keep the modules, the components we provide up to date from a security point of view. But if you're hosting these things independently, you need to pull these patches down and install them locally yourself. And that's not something that we're going to do.
Yes, when we say yourself, that may be in-house developers, or maybe you paying a company to help you set up that code. And
but I think it's worth saying that this isn't a service wrapper that you're buying. This is a club that you're committing to, and I think the minimum level of commitment is the ability to apply security updates yourself, because that's not something this group of councils.
And host it.
And host it.
That isn't something that.
But I think talking to Egley's point from earlier is that we might well meet 10 councils going, I can't be bothered with that. I actually want to buy that. In which case we can look at it some more. And it may well be, I don't know, in the future, are we providing software? I don't know. We'll talk about it. But I think that there are opportunities there that we can explore. But I think it's a much longer term plan than this one that we're on.
It's worth mentioning also that there are some Drupal hosting companies who will provide automatic updates as part of the hosting service. So people like Pantheon and Acquia, you pay for it, but that kind of is for councils that want to have that sort of dealt with separately. And so in the future, where this is a Drupal distribution which sits on top of Drupal core, that can be installed on a hosted service, you can have those people apply any updates that come from Drupal and the distribution.
And Brighton's in the ring that use Acquia. And do you pay for that patching, or do you do it?
We have the service. We've never used it just because there's so much custom code, particularly on our old D7 site, that we can't just have them automatically applying patches without us doing but when we switch off D7, we really hope to use that more. And I can't remember whether it's an add-on to our package or whether it's called Remote Administrator. And I think it might just be bundled with the hosting that we have. I don't think we've chosen it. So
be good to get more info.
Yeah, so I think we're going to start using that more from April. So
Excellent. Any more questions? Any more questions?
I have a few.
Is
there any more?
I don't think so.
There's no online. There's someone who Tom turned updates who's just got a link to the slides to have a few.
Okay. I was interested in the governance parts, because you were saying you would have two groups, like a product group and a tech group. And so who would be the members? Like, where would the members come from? Would it be just the users? Like, would it be those 8 councils, or have you thought about it? Because imagine if it keeps expanding. At some point, these two groups are just going to grow and become unmanageable. But how do you what's the plan for managing this? Sorry,
we have.
Maybe too early in the day to answer.
No, we
That's
have.
a great question.
We have, and we did intentionally leave that out because otherwise the deck was getting to an hour and a half. So thank you for raising that question. So potentially, we presume the easiest kind of role that councils might provide is someone who is either a web manager or if they're called a product manager or product
Right.
owner, that type of thing. If that happens, and because they would like to have a say in what the product is evolving into, we presume they're going to be mostly product managers coming from councils. So if that is the case, at the moment, people can just talk on Slack and sort things out based on some of the approaches we've discussed. But yeah, when you get to more than 6, 7, it becomes an issue. So we have different ways that we're going to try that. So, for example, if you're a new product manager, you don't necessarily immediately are burdened with road mapping or sprint planning, this and that. We propose that you go through some sort of socialization process where you take on some of the admin, like promotion, onboarding people, offboarding people type of thing, and then you just observe what's happening in sprint planning and road mapping and this and that. Or you work with the user researchers and you go to the field and then work with other councils and etc. So you get that knowledge, then you start inserting yourself, if you want to, and if you do have time, to those kind of key agile ceremonies and etc. So that's kind of the work the product managers work.
Sure.
And in terms of siding, we still go with the consensus in road mapping, as opposed to maybe some other criteria that you can use in sprint planning. So like we have a lovely matrix that KLC uses to triage their kind of priorities. It's basically who's affected, how many people is affected by this, is there a workaround, which gives you a minus score. And then do we think it's a complex thing or is it an easy thing to solve? Based on that kind of scoring, it gives you a list of things that you should take as priority. And that's how we try to make it happen, so that things become less personal. In a space where 6 people, more than 6 people, maybe 16 people are trying to talk.
Yeah.
Because sprint planning is quite difficult as it is. We would like to depersonalize it.
So on the tech, so who's in both? So the technical group is largely the developers that make up this community. So right now it would be, if it's just 2 councils, Brighton and Croydon, it's Andy and Brighton. Adnan might be on the call. Chris does front end in Croydon. But as new councils come in, if they're bringing developers, they're welcome to join. Right. If they want to play an active part, if they want to understand, be involved in the architectural decisions, join. It's been very low overhead between our 2 councils so far to keep that going. And on the product group, adding to what Erd said, is that we expect, you can't just do product in a vacuum. You do need to understand what it is you're building and why. So we think there will be developers that are in that group as well. So that, when a group of product managers come along and say, such and such a feature, we can actually have a reasonable conversation that has user stories, that is estimated, and we do know where we're going with it. So I think it's, technical is the devs, product is some of the product managers that have joined. And very much along Erd's sort of model where, we can't all do everything. A clustered approach around, onboarding, research, detailed sort of definition of products.
Yeah.
Or, are the components in the code where people go, we all have directories, let's go work on that. We don't like this, it doesn't need work, let's not work on that. And it might well divide that way. We don't know yet.
Are you looking to trial this sort of governance structure in the alpha potentially?
Yes.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, if I just add, there were some findings that we didn't have time to include. So one was, in the conversations we've had with councils, because at a certain level they're all councils and the services and the things they're doing are similar, while some councils are different, so they may or may not be interested, there was a general view that at a very high level there's relatively little room for kind of like significant disagreement, but there is at a certain detail, exactly as Will was saying, whether you do certain things or how you might do it, but also what we saw is there's very likely to be smaller groups of councils would cluster around the needs of particular things they're doing. So one set of councils might be using one search technology, another might be using another, people might be using a particular form engine, and so they might want certain page templates to work in a certain way. So you might have some, which is part of why having it more thinking about modularization and components is so that a group that are using a particular technology, they don't need to get agreement from everyone else about the fact that they're going to do a particular, that they're going to do a particular thing that's different. What we were also really interested in when we were talking to people was this kind of, is there an onion skin? Is there a kind of a core group and some outer, how might that work? And at the moment it feels like, well, because everything's got to be published, it's entirely okay for a council to just take that and not be involved.
Yeah.
But it felt like there is a potential as it grows that there is a secondary ring where you at least, the inner group acknowledge that you exist, that you're taking and using the code, you can report problems, but that council doesn't want to sign the MOU and make the make potentially what the commitment is. At the moment, it feels like that's not necessary because it's there. If you want to use the code, you can use the code.
But it is complex. It's there are different scenarios how you can approach that complexity, and we started thinking about those a little bit. Yeah, it's part of discovery.
The other thing I'd probably say as well on that is that model works very well for councils who, like A, are currently on Drupal, and B, have a willingness to get on Drupal and have that technical capability. But I guess one thing that potentially the further push that maybe we need to have with the project is, like, is this something that would effectively attract other councils who, like, A, are not on Drupal, and B, do not have the technical capability, or where will they to do something like this? And I think potentially that's where we need to be having that conversation with you, because it like, in terms of just like the scale of this thing, I think it would look very different with different levels of funding.
So in the 10 councils that we've got, 10 we've talked to and 8 in the alpha, 1 chose Drupal because we exist.
Right.
I think that's something that's going to happen again, and John talked about that. And 1 council we spoke to were very happy on Bracknell, and they're going to stay there. Thank you very much. You know, great. But they did say, do you know all this collaboration stuff that you're doing? We might want to use that from a Bracknell community. To which case we said, well, here you go. You know, so it's paid for itself. So I think it's we need to crack this problem of 8, and then see who else that brings to the table, which I think will bring many people. And I think some of them will want to come with a checkbook, and that's something we need to talk about. How do we, what is the model? Where is this going? So
yeah.
So we've got a sort of related comment. So this is from Hannah again, Milton Keynes, who's saying, you know, that they don't currently have a Drupal platform, so all the services would initially need to be outsourced. So, you know, she said on the previous comment, great, that's really helpful. And what she'd be doing is looking into the wording around procuring services that enable the solution to be an option within a wider procurement process. And has a question around whether any work has been done around this procurement and the wording.
So we did talk about this, didn't we? So you know, what could you give to an agency that was nervous about open source? I think we'll see that, and we provide that in the alpha. What would you give to a procurement department who doesn't really understand this? Well, again, I think that would be a challenge that we need to.
Yeah. So those were 2 things that came out clearly for councils. Was one is, I've got that every single person we spoke to is going to have to make some case to some level of senior leadership. So one thing it would be fantastic for the group to be able to provide is some, so you don't have to completely make up that for yourself. And then yes, exactly. The second one was, well, we're going to go and need to procure hosting, we're going to go and need to procure agency staff or contract or whatever different ways we can doing it. Can the group have something so I don't have to make up how to explain that to an agency? Can I have something and I say, great, we want you to be our agency, by the way, to be our agency, one of the criteria is you have to commit to what that is and how we do that. But that was a definite need for people that was smooth there.
I think the nice thing about it is it's already starting to happen as well. So Westminster, to join this project, had to go and have lots of conversations with people, and part of that was, you know, a business case that sets out why this is the best option, which I haven't asked Alistair if we could share it, but I'm sure we could look at it. And as part of the procurement work they did for that, I believe, via Digital Marketplace, there was a conversation, or there were clauses around being part of a project that would include open source. You know, and you know, I think maybe even Will from Zutra is on the call, and they won a contract to help with Westminster site. And I don't know whether they remember that. He might start typing in a second. I don't know if they remember that clause particularly. I remember reading it in one of the things they'd submitted. So, you know, to Hannah's point, it's been done. You know, we're after an agency that understands this specifically and how it might work. And I think that's something we can build on.
Will says yes, it was part of it, and we're keen to contribute.
Yeah, there we go. So it's been done. Yeah, we just need to do it more.
Another benefit of sharing other things other than code, like, you know,
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
guidelines or documents.
it's the shared experiences of this, isn't it? We've all been on a different journey, but it relates to future councils coming in. We've probably done something similar. One of us has probably done something
It was why those three things of what we were talking about, it's why we spent so long talking about, so what's your path? Not just, and exactly as you were just saying, it's not the code, yes, the code and the technical part of it, but what's your route to that, and what things do we do, the forces are, what things can we do to smooth that path and make that decision making simpler. So that was, a lot of the interrogation around how this actually is going to work for people.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Any more? We can keep going till 4. I don't know if you want to. No.
Are there any more questions from anybody remotely online?
No, says Annie. No. Thank you for watching. Just you two though, from the Crongs. That's a bit poor. Oh, excellent. Hi, Mira.
And more.
Oh, hi, Adnan. Thank you for long-suffering team.
They just don't have an hour.
Sally and Tom taking all the glory.
Yeah. Any more questions from anyone? So I saw a message there.
As web manager saying, that's good. Thanks for your answers.
Thanks for your answers. Should we call that
We've
down?
been looking at your fancy owl online as well. While we've been watching, we've been looking at the cost of an owl.
The cost of an hour.
Oh, yeah.
Don't.
Do you know what?
Yeah, don't.
Interestingly, since our first meeting here with the owl, we went straight back to our office and ordered one as on a test period, because you get the first month to test it for free. And if you like it, you then have to pay lots of money.
Is it one-off though, not a rent?
Yes, it is. And the fascinating thing is we had a senior leadership team Q&A here, and the funniest thing, which had just literally everything, because we had loads of people remote. We got Leeds office and we had loads of people all over the place. The owl was like over here, and we'd taken the tables down, and the owl was over here, and the owl figures out what in the room it should be trying to look at when there's a discussion, and mostly it does it really, really well. So there'll be conversation between two people, and very often it actually has both of them. It's like some old film where you've got the two people. And then there was one person decided to open a packet of crisps, and the owl replaced the entire screen with just a picture of Vita opening it, because that was clearly the noisiest and loudest and most exciting thing happening in the room. So Vita was just entirely innocently, really quietly trying to open this packet of crisps, and everyone else in the thing, all they could see on their screen was Vita opening this crisp packet. And Vita was completely, and then suddenly looked around and went, oh. So anyway, yes, they're really good, but they can just do strange things every now and again.
Okay.
Colin Stenning says, thanks everyone, when will the mission patches be sent out?
So I did an order to move print, and they were supposed to be delivered today, but I think, I don't know, things aren't getting delivered at the moment, so we'll see.
Don't look at me. Nothing to do with the ministry.
No, I'm going.
I'm not part of the right team. No.
I'm so going. No, I wasn't looking at you specifically. This got delivered, so that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming, thank you for dialing in. We filmed this, and just to reiterate, if you don't want to appear, we'll edit you out, just let me know. If you've got any questions, please message us, those are the contacts. This will all get put in a package and given to CLG, but also, there's a lot to it. We'll publish it probably on Croydon Digital. And it's an open invitation to come and chat with us about where this is headed. All right? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
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 Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks Andy. Thanks Croydon.